Good morning. Welcome to the home of Unitarian Universalism in Central Washington. My name is Chris Rader. I'm glad to be your celebrant this morning, along with our worship leader, Reverend Thomas Perchlik. If you're a visitor today, we're so glad you're here. We welcome every person of goodwill, just as you are. Whatever your religious background or beliefs, no matter what you look like or whom you love, you are welcome here. We invite everyone to join us for coffee, treats, and conversation after the service. And welcome to the folks on Zoom. We're happy that in the last couple of weeks, we've had 17 people join us on Zoom. I don't know how many are there today, but we're glad that you are. And Zoom participants, you will find the order of service and the song lyrics in the chat. Linnea Shannon is our Zoom host today. And now will the folks in this building turn and see that exit sign? There's a camera right up there. Let's wave to the Zoom folks. And now take just a minute and greet the people sitting around you. We have just a few announcements this morning. Right after today's service, members of our social justice team and the Interfaith Justice Coalition will hold a forum. We'll have 10 or 15 minutes of coffee hour, and then anyone interested in learning more about the coalition is welcome to sit in on the forum. We'll be hearing more from Interfaith Justice Coalition a little later in the service. Next Sunday, after the service, our membership team will host a newcomer chat. Anyone who's relatively new to the fellowship is welcome to attend. It's a time to get to know our minister and a few others of us, learn about CUUF, and to socialize over snacks. We'll have some toys and games for kids to play with while parents are chatting. And looking ahead a bit, the CUUF board and the new building task force will be presenting some information about the options we have as we look for a new church building. In case you don't know, the highway department will be tearing this building down in a few years when they expand Sunset Highway. If you haven't already received the information sheet, 2 pages of stuff that our new building task force has worked on. They're back on the table, back by Tom and the greeters right back there, if you'd like to pick one of those up before that meeting. Again, that's Sunday, February 2nd, after the service. And I think we're all aware that our building and the homes of just about all of us are located on the ancestral homeland of the Pasquosa. Since time immemorial, the Pasquosa have lived here, making a vibrant life, a way of life, and a rich culture from the land. We acknowledge that their land, like that of so many other First Nations in this country, was taken because the U.S. government broke treaty obligations and carelessly allowed uninvited white colonizers to settle on Pasquosa homeland. The Pasquosa still live here, still practice their cultural traditions, and are still working to have those treaty obligations fulfilled. CUUF and other entities in the Wenatchee Valley are working with the Colville Confederated Tribes, including the Pasquosa, to restore some of that land to them. For more on the subject, you can visit our website, cascadeuu.org, under Welcome. And now, let's rise in body and spirit to sing our opening song, For the Earth Forever Turning, hymn number 163. The words are on the screen.
Song written by a woman named Kim Oler for Paul Winter's Misa Gaia, or the Earth Mass, that in creation of music that invokes how the spiritual, the ineffable, the meaningful are embodied in the tangible quality of this world. To call you to worship, that song, and then these words adapted from a UU lay leader, Mary Selden. As we face a new year, we cannot know what it will hold. And thus we gather in worship, And we say, bright flame of the earth, awake. Send forth your shining light beyond this year, into the many beyond. Show us the ways of love and help and care that can continue to unfold. The ways of justice and mercy and equality. O flame of life, illuminate unto all the generations to come. Show to the world a beacon of safe harbor, a beacon of help that will help us to find kindred warmth in this gathering so that we may share it and help make it real.
In Unitarian Universalist congregations around the world, the chalice and flame symbolize people gathering together in loving community and inspiration. If you at home have your chalice with you, please join us now in lighting it. Here in the sanctuary, we will speak these lighting words in unison. Yesterday, our distant ancestors gathered around a flame to share understanding and find comfort. Tomorrow, our descendants will gather around a flame to celebrate what we brought out of the darkness. Today, we gather here around this flame to seek understanding and to be together.
I always like that big, tall flame. Now I have a story. Story for all ages. If you are a child and would like to come forward, because eventually you're going to have to go back down through the pathway, please do so. All of us are children at some level or another, right? But I got a story that has big pictures. That's a nice story about Mabel Wants a Friend. You can take it with you to the children's classes. You're going to follow Mari, who's back here, and well, you're going to go to Mari, but first people are going to make a bridge. You can go under the bridge, through the tunnel, and we're going to sing to you. Go with each other to find meaning in the spirit of love that we share. Now go with each other to find meaning in the spirit of love that we share.
We have three very brief little quotes to share today to fit today's theme of communication. The first is from the New Testament book of James. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. And from Louis Menard, free speech is protected not because it's a God-given right. It's protected because in a democracy, if you do not allow the losers to have their say, you cannot expect them to submit to the will of the winners. Free speech legitimizes majoritarian rule. And finally, from Stephen Covey, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
We now take time to create caring community, to share with one another the events of our lives. It's a little different each week, and people have to adjust. I'm into creativity, but it causes some turbulence. Remember to share only what you have permission to share. If possible, just put it into a sentence or two, but most of us have a tendency towards storytelling, just like me, so I understand that. come forward. I'll bring a flame down to the sand. Make sure that you say your name first, and then share briefly and light a candle as you wish. May we open our hearts to all that connects us through silence, beyond the vast silence of space and time. I was sitting with the people of Stone Blossom Sangha the other day and talking about how our congregation and their congregation, it's really not two separate groups, but overlapping. That usually it's a much larger congregation that spawns smaller congregations, but this one spawned a whole new community of Buddhists in this city. And that's a good thing. It's from a rising of community, from listening to one another, understanding each other. To communicate is to connect. Communication is always a two-way street. One lane is for listening, and the other one is for speaking. And together they provide an avenue through the experience of community, through the heart of community. Remember that the words community and communion and communicate are all born of the same Latin root, communicare, which meant to share. And its related word, communis, which means to connect or to make common. The title of the sermon, I Can't Hear You, is often used to encourage people to speak more loudly, like at a big sporting event where the cheerleader will lead a cheer and just say, I can't hear you, and then everyone yells a lot louder. It's also used as a complaint, especially when someone's voice is not carrying over background sound and you want them to speak a little bit louder or clearly. You say, I can't hear you. But speaking louder is not always the solution. I wanted to share a story I heard years ago, about communication. A woman comes into a lawyer's office and she says, I want to divorce my husband. And he said, okay, I'll need to ask you a few questions first. I need to get some more information. He said, so what are your grounds? She said, oh, well, we got about 5 acres out in the county. And he said, no, I mean, do you have a grudge with him? And she says, well, we got a carport. It's got a nice tool shed next to it. He goes, no, let me ask you a different way. Do you have any complaints about him? Well, like what? She goes, well, like, does he beat you up? She goes, oh no, I always wake up at least an hour before he does. Exasperated, the lawyer finally asks, why do you want to divorce him? And she said, that guy can't communicate worth anything. Real human communication has always been fraught with error and difficulty. But these days, these ancient problems are being amplified by technology. Social change is being generated by all these new ways of communicating and no clear methods or rules about how to use them well. The way to temper the troubles is still the same. Stephen Covey encouraged us in the 1990s, if I were to summarize in one sentence the single most important principle I have learned in the field of interpersonal relationships, it would be this: seek first to understand and then to be understood. And both of those habits are much more difficult in the contemporary world, where our media systems are reinforcing just the same messages. People go to hear what they want to hear. I still remember the first email that I ever sent. My board president in Lubbock, Texas, really encouraged me to have an email account. And so I set that up, and he was at his office at the university that day. So my first email was to him, and I said, "Hey, George, how are you today? I got my email working." And he sent back, like, almost instantly. It was like, "Great," sends back. And then he said, "Are you ready for the meeting tonight?" And I said, "Yes." And I thought, this is amazing. It's like instantaneous communication. We didn't have to have the long, make the phone call and then talk about the day and ask how you are. We just clarified some stuff and moved on. And I thought, what a blessing. Nowadays, I think of email as a very mixed blessing. When I start every day, it's like I spend maybe an hour at the very least, 2 hours, triaging all my emails. Which things do I want to get rid of right away? Which ones do I want to respond to later? Which ones do I need to respond to right away? And what kind of things am I going to keep just in case? Recently, I saw a cartoon. It says school safety across the top, and there was that one of those chain link fences, and it had 3 signs attached. You can kind of see the school building behind. And then the first sign said, "No guns," had the big circle with a slash across it, across a gun. The second was "No drugs," some paraphernalia and a big circle and a slash across it. And the third one was "No cell phones," and a big slash across it. And a lot of schools have been struggling with the ways in which the media and the cell phones connect people in the wrong ways to the wrong things, or distracting, confusing, especially to youth. The fear, you talk about FOMO, the fear of missing out that rises up. We want to connect. We have these tools for connecting, but they're getting in our way. They're undermining our ability to hear. For instance, you're in a classroom and the teacher's speaking. Can you actually hear what the teacher is saying? Can you hear what you're supposed to be learning? And it's like this everywhere. I saw it yesterday. I was just walking along and saw several people who were walking over. I was happened to be in Leavenworth, and it's crowds of people. People just walking along like this, and they'd come up to a curb and would kind of lose their balance slightly as they're stepping on the curb because they're not paying attention. They're not awake fully. Their focus is in the wrong place, not aware of all the people around them. Note the importance of listening and understanding people. When we have something we want to say, often we need to check out who it is that we're talking to. We need to listen to them and understand what they're going to be able to hear. There was a great little article about running into people. We, in this congregation, deeply value the process of science, the results of science and reason and study and education, how important those are. Then we run into people who are science deniers, people who are even getting into the U.S. federal government who are denying the results of science or ignoring it. And how do you talk to those people? And sometimes the most important thing to do is first understand why they deny the science. What does it make that it makes them feel to hear the messages about science and vaccines and illnesses, and also usually when you talk to those people, they'll talk about someone in their family, someone that they know, someone that they trusted who was hurt by science or was misguided or had bad diagnosis, and they're angry about something or frightened about something or hurt by something, and being able to hear that first, understand that, then you can start saying the things that you know are true and the things that give you hope and connect you to other people and tell you that you're going to be able to take care of others well. Then you can share because they're able to hear you. And they're able to hear you because you listened first, made sure you knew who you were talking to. There's another story I heard about a guy. It was set back in the days when laptops were not really present and email was still new. And this guy went on a business trip down to Mexico. And he's there and he's kind of excited in the business trip. And then after the business trip, his family's going to come. And he goes into his hotel room, and the hotel is so nice. There's actually a laptop or a desktop computer in the hotel room. And he realizes he can send his wife a message. So he immediately sits down and he types out her email address, but he misses the numbers on it by 2 numbers. He switches the numbers. So instead of the message that he had going to his spouse, instead the message goes to a widow, someone whose husband had just died. And she comes in and she's looking at her email, expecting to get a lot of condolences and things, a Christian woman, expecting to hear messages about him being in heaven. And she gets this message that says, "My beloved, I miss you terribly. I'm really excited because they have computers here. And they said I could contact my beloved back home. I want you to come. I've made arrangements for you to get here at the end of the week. And P.S., bring light clothes because it's really hot here." It's a great little story. He didn't know who he was talking to. He hadn't checked it out. We have to be careful. We have to listen. We have to notice what's happening. We have to notice the responses of other people and check it out. Oftentimes we'll say something and people, I have this with my wife. I've been with my wife for 40 years. There's still times where I'll say something or she'll say something and I misunderstand exactly what it was she said. And I think she's saying something else. And then we have to go through this process of, now what were you saying? And she clarifies it. And that process of clarifying, that willingness to clarify and not get angry and not get frightened, but to listen, is the whole heart of creating community, of deepening our communication with one another, of seeking peace and love and well-being in our living. In one of the sutras, Buddha speaks about those who are without blame and without fault in their speaking. And he said, those who speak what is true and what is loving and what is kind, that willingness to speak clearly and truthfully and kindly was an ancient understanding, realizing that people often don't do it well. Right? We're often messing up. We're often trying to force our opinions on other people. So another person who talked about autobiographical listening, which is when you're listening to someone else in order to hear your own story and what they're saying, to make those connections between what they're saying and what you're saying. And that's okay unless that's the only thing you're doing. And you won't really understand that person. And you won't really be able to get them to understand you unless you listen more carefully to what is it that happened to them and how did that motivate them. And when you do that, and we most often do that too, we create community. We see the links. We form a deeper sense of togetherness. And then we have things like email. I'll say one thing about email is it's actually more distancing than vocal communication. It feels to me like someone's farther away, and it's harder to make a deep connection. It either takes a lot of time and energy and work to really get your words right, or it takes a lot of exchanges of email to get to the right place. And I think that's why some things like TikTok and Facebook, where people are putting up videos and images, are really popular, because it's another way of connecting. But it's still a distanced way of connecting. And oftentimes, I'll get an email from someone, and I'll just pick up the phone and call them. Because then I hear their voice, and they hear my voice, and it feels like we're at least getting a little bit more on the same page, a little bit more quickly. I always say, I sent the email is not the same as they got the email, they read the email, they understood the email, they responded well to the email, and I confirmed their response. You really have to make sure. And oftentimes we have these email chains. One of the things that's just radically changed in ministry is the entire board gets emailed with the board email, and then we have all 8, 10 people who are on this chain, and sometimes other people get added on to the chain, and then people will start talking about it, and they have all these different opinions, and there's no way to really manage the conversation like we could if we were physically in the same space, and so these chains become links of chains with other chains linked onto those other chains, and no one knows what we're talking about, and no one changes the subject heading when they start talking about something else. No one changes who's included in the chain when they really don't need to be included everyone in that conversation. It's thinking a little bit more carefully about how we communicate, who we're trying to communicate with, what we're trying to communicate. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. Listening carefully. And not just spewing stuff because you know it's going to get attention. There's a big phenomenon way, way back before the digital age, when we had newspapers. They were actually made out of paper. And the newspaper owners wanted to make more money. And they found out if they had a big splashy headline, they would get more people go, oh, this is interesting, this is exciting, I want to read this. And it was called yellow journalism. It came from the name came from a particular instance, but it was this desire to come up with bigger and bigger headlines, greater and greater drama. And one of the worst things that came out was our war, the United States war with Spain, the Spanish-American War, was fueled by newspapers that talked about a fire on a warship. It was just a fire that started on the warship. But people started saying that the Spanish attacked this ship. The Spanish set fire. We've already being threatened. We need to shut down. The Spanish are dominating, and it would have these big headlines about how terrible they were and what evils they were and why we need to defend our place in the world. People were not speaking truthfully. They were not speaking kindly. They were not speaking carefully. Always been there, the troubles. And then recently I heard this story. It's a group of clergy, and there was 6 of us, and we went to meet with the people who were running the county government, county's homelessness programs. And they told us about what happened over at the Malaga encampment. It was a huge encampment of homeless people near the river. And in the old days, and I remember this, in the old days there started to be an encampment, and the neighborhood did not want it, or police just decided it was becoming a dangerous spot. You just go in there and drive everyone out. The police would go in with their clubs and drive everyone out, right? But what we did in this county, because we have listened to the people who are homeless, listened to what helps them, engaged in dialogue, creating community. People went to the encampment and said, you're going to have to move in a week. So they go a week early. They say, you're going to have to move in a week. And here are cards for all the various services, housing services that are available in this county. And we as the government are coordinating all of these. And they also have this wonderful thing called coordinated entry. And I thought, oh, what street person's going to be able to get involved in this court? You have to go make an appointment somewhere, or you got to get to a computer and then sign onto the computer and then figure out how to work it. And it turns out that a lot of people on the streets still have cell phones. And so they would say, type in CE Wenatchee. Coordinated entry Wenatchee. And there's this simple, it's got a lot of questions, but still simple dialogue that people can do with a computer, saying what's going on in their lives, what they need, what their problems are, what they might want, what they might be able to afford. These kinds of questions start, and then that's the way in which everyone can get into the system and start connecting to other people who are helping. And one of the women who was there telling us about these services and talked about how she went to the Malaga encampment just before they were about to shut it down completely. And they got over 600,000 pounds of trash of all sorts, every level of trash and waste and just junk. And they had 600,000 pounds had to be taken out after they got the people out. But as they were driving, encouraging the last few people to go out, there was one young woman who came up and just said, I've been listening to you, and for the whole week you've been telling us to get help. And I suddenly realized that I need substance abuse. We were talking about addiction earlier. She said, I need some substance abuse counseling. And this woman said, oh, this is, gave her the card and said, I'll help you get there and I'll help you connect. And the woman just got tears in her eyes. A homeless woman with nothing to guide her and strengthen her in the world suddenly found she had something that could give her hope. And it was because people listened, because people paid attention, and when they spoke, they knew who they were talking to. Homelessness is actually very complicated because the reasons that people become homeless and the things that get them stuck there are very different for every person. I remember a member of a UU church who had been on the board got schizophrenia. And we would do it. The congregation, even before I knew her, had done everything they could to get her into housing and to counseling. And just every once in a while, her delusions would just come up and tell her she was in danger or something, and she'd go running off and we'd lose her again. Homelessness is complicated and difficult. And all the things that get in the way of communication will get in the way of communicating, especially with people with schizophrenia. But if we are loving and kind and listening and paying attention, maybe we can communicate all together, all of us together, to help more people and help them better and bring hope into the world. One of the things this congregation did was create the Interfaith Justice Coalition. And I've been a part of interfaith groups for years, and I remember one time where a Muslim in a group just was listening to a Jew, and he said, I can't believe it. The words you just said in your prayer are exactly the same words we use in Arabic in the prayers that we use. And there was a sudden dissolve of all the tensions and the fears and the angers and the hatreds in the world were just dissolved in those two men who just came up and embraced each other. And this Interfaith Justice Coalition has clear goals and ideals that we're working together, and we are helping people get together. Of course, interfaith in Wenatchee primarily means between Lutherans and Methodists, and maybe even the Catholics are there, right? We do have a Jewish community, or we do have a Muslim community that's rising up that will eventually be something great, I'm sure. But again, the reason we did that was because we know the power of dialogue and communication across all those things that normally divide human beings. Religion can be very divisive, but we know from our own experience here and in the world that if we listen carefully, understand one another, and then speak kindly, we will create deeper, more powerful, more loving community. So to continue that work of communication and community building, I encourage us to move forward towards the offering.
The offering is an ancient element of worship. The act of giving, regardless of amount, is a spiritual practice that expresses our thankfulness and generosity. Joyfully sharing our gifts and strengths in service to the greater good is one way that we create the beloved community. Before we pass the plates, share the plates, I'm going to mention that once a month, CUUF shares our collection with a local organization with values similar to ours. This month, the Share the Plate recipient is the Interfaith Justice Coalition. And I think Nancy is going to come up and tell us a little bit about the coalition.
Hi, I'm Nancy Warner, and I'm a member of this church. I know most of you. And with me is Karen Jensen. We're both on the steering committee of the Interfaith Justice Coalition. And we just have a few minutes to talk to you about that, but we will be around after the service to tell you a little bit more. And also we have this afternoon, one of our monthly gatherings at the First United Methodist Church that goes from 2 to 3. So this is actually a big bonus day for the Interfaith Justice Coalition. So briefly, Thomas mentioned that CUF started the Interfaith Justice Coalition in companionship and partnership with the Sunny Slope Church because we wanted to have a bigger voice in this valley that reflected love and justice instead of fear and hate. We were tired of seeing big headlines that did not reflect our values. So we decided that we would do something about that and join forces with as many people and churches as we could to build that community voice. So that's kind of what created the Interfaith Justice Coalition. And we sat in this room over a year ago and came up with our mission statement. So I'm just going to read this to you. Some of you were here for this thumbs up event. In solidarity with affected communities, we are diverse people of faith and conscience who seek the justice, equity, and collective liberation needed to create a flourishing world beginning in North Central Washington. So we also came up with a vision statement, which is enabling service, love, and justice so that all can thrive. And then we've gone through, as some of you know, you've been in our meetings, we've gone through what are our core values, and they cross faith lines, they cross community lines. They're things that are familiar to us. They're direct action and advocacy, collaboration, radical inclusion, allyship, being in relationship with others, individual transformation through education, commitment to nonviolence, and resilience. So those are just some of the things. So I am a steering committee right now, so is Laura from CUF, but Karen, I'm going to ask Karen to talk a little bit more about the coalition, just so you have if you're not familiar with it, you have a little bit more understanding of who we are and what we're doing. So Karen Jensen.
Hi, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to see so many faces that I know through Interfaith Justice and other organizations that I'm part of in the community. And I belong to St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and the Interfaith Justice Coalition is interested in welcoming anyone from whether or not they're affiliated. My husband actually grew up in the Jewish faith, and he's not affiliated with an organization in the Wenatchee Valley at this time, and he attends every meeting and feels very, very welcome. So the idea is really, truly radical inclusion, as our core values state. We meet almost every month. From time to time, we'll take a month off, such as one month last June, we attended Pride, the Pride celebration in lieu of an organized meeting. But typically we meet and we rotate around to different communities of faith who host the meetings. And a number of meetings have been held here at CUF and at St. Luke's and many other organizations. Today's meeting is at the First United Methodist Church, and we'll gather at 1:30 for coffee and a chance to say hello to each other, and then our business meeting, or our organized meeting, will start at 2 o'clock. We have been engaged in a number of advocacy events. I mentioned Pride. We've participated last year and will again this year in the Faith Action Network's Legislative Advocacy Day. Some of us will go as a community group of folks from communities of faith to Olympia. And again, we've hosted some educational events. We had some cornerstone projects through the fall focused on civic activity as an act of faith and some voter education events. So that's just a little bit about our organization. And anything else you want to mention, Nancy? Chris is also a member, and I've met her there. Yeah.
I think that's good, and thanks for having us. And we're gonna stick around for a little while after the service if you want to ask any of us, including Laura, who's on the steering committee for the coalition. Thank you.
All right.
Full words, playful words adapted from Ren Bellevance Grace. She serves Unitarian Universalists in New England region. Let us go in praise of computers and routers, hardware and software that can help us build connectedness. Let us go in praise of all the gremlins that live in the machines and bug our programs and help us to practice patience and perseverance. We gather in praise of the trolls who dwell on the internet and push us to live out our deepest values in real time. We gather in praise of anything that that eats our data and devours our drafts, because ultimately they help us remember that our work, like our lives, are as much transient as transcendent. We gather in praise of lost passwords and programs that are difficult to manage, reminding us that with some people we need to find new paths to make connections, and to remember that not everyone uses the same keywords. We gather in praise of all that creates community, though it is always at risk of being told, "Page not found," or signals are dropped, and miscommunication happens, and feelings get hurt, and misunderstandings arise. Let us also find that it's always worth that risk to communicate. Amen.
And now, as we extinguish our chalice, please join me in saying the words printed in your order of service or on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and embody in our lives until we are together again. And now let's join hands around the circle and sing one more little time together.